And now for our keynote presentation. And really pleased to have George Hawkins here with us. I first heard a little bit about his journey at an ASCE conference a few years ago and just really inspired me. So I was thrilled when he agreed to be our keynote lunch speaker. But he started Moonshot Missions after he was CEO of DC Water. And so he's going to come and talk to us a little bit more about that journey. We heard a little bit about DC Water from Alan and some others, but he's going to tell us the rest of the story. You want to use this mic or that mic?
I got the call on the bat phone. Some of you have heard this story. Every head of a utility has a bat phone. It was a Saturday morning in Washington, D.C. in December of 2009. I lived in a basement apartment, an English basement apartment. I didn't know when I responded to the ad, what an English basement apartment was. Like, do they serve you tea when you get there? But it's actually a very useful kind of basement. An English basement apartment, should you ever be renting one, means there is a window to the outside world. It's not totally submerged. So you see a little bit of the world from your little basement apartment. And for me, getting up every day, I knew what the weather was by looking out my little window. Got up, I just started in the job running DC Water and Sewer Authority. I'll come back to DC Water in a moment. Thank you for the kind words. It took us a long time to get to the point of being able to do sophisticated design build. Although at the moment, DC does almost all of its anything unusual, it's always design build. There's no question what you said is exactly right. But I was just starting. I'd only been on the job for 2 months. I didn't really know what the place did. It's kind of shocking. I'm a lawyer by training. So I asked him, when there's a big water main break, ask me to come along. I want to see what goes on. Well, that morning there had been a water main break. By the way, there are most water main breaks on evenings and weekends because that's when people use their water a lot. So just as Heather said, if you chart it from 9 to 5, you're going to miss all those evenings when everybody comes home, everybody turns on their water, taking a shower, using everything. Water main breaks happen as the use goes up. Weekends, same thing. Anyways, this was a Saturday morning, so I got up, put my uniform on. I wore a standard issue DC Water uniform every day, name on it in case I forget. I always loved that. My title on it in case I forget, little patch, the whole thing. My kids thought I worked at a gas station. And I looked out the window to see what the weather was, and it was sheet white. Like I've never seen that in DC before. Well, if you look it up, December 2009, that night before, actually the whole night before, was snowpocalypse in D.C. 3 feet of snow had fallen in a city that closes down if there's a half an inch. This is not Cleveland or Chicago or places that are used to snow. This is Washington, D.C. I couldn't even get out my door from my basement apartment because the snow had piled up so high in the drift. But I did eventually push my way out. I walked up 9th Street, major road, D.C., completely deserted. Looked like a movie out of a science fiction apocalypse because there was nobody. And I walked down the middle of the street, and you all technical people would know why, but the wind was blowing the snow to the side. So I actually could walk, trudging through the snow, nothing was plowed, to get to Bryant Street where we roll our trucks to respond to water main breaks, which happened to be near where I live. So we get in a flotilla and plowed our way across town. We had our 650 vehicles in the DC Water fleet, including a bunch with plows on them. Actually, we plowed for the city for a fee when in need. So we plowed our way across the town. We turned the corner. The break, I remember to this day like it was yesterday, was 21st in New Hampshire, which was a pretty long way from 9th Street, so it took us a while to come around the corner, but I used to live over there, so I knew that neighborhood. Near the World Bank, and there was actually a big World Bank conference going on. We had put some water was out for a bunch of hotels, and there were folks in very foreign garb looking out the windows like, what the hell's going on with our water? And this was sort of fascinating, thinking about buried assets, which I had never really thought about before, except when I was a kid and used to, we all compete, back in the day, there was no controls over stormwater and sewer discharges directly to streams outside of Cleveland. And we used to, as kids, go in the sewer lines and see who was the bravest to go as far as possible. So you see the little tiny white light in the distance, not thinking of hydrogen sulfide or all the ways we could have died in there. Isn't it amazing the things, those of us who are older, the things we did when we were kids that you just would never do today, that we somehow survived, that being one of them. But anyways, we come around the corner. What I never thought about is when a water main breaks underground, it generates tremendous water pressure. And the water will be going wherever it can go with less pressure, which is usually up and out. That's, of course, why it's not going down, except in one circumstance, which I'll mention. But that means it's going to come up wherever the hard surface above it has a crack that allows the water through. Water main breaks often will, as we all know, will kick up the street to create its own crack to let the pressure out. But water will also come out of every place where the hard surface is punctured in any reason. So water is coming out where street signs created a hole in the concrete, where there was past cracks in the concrete. Coming up, it looked like a water park, Blizzard Beach, Walt Disney, because water was shooting up all over the place. And I'm sitting in the crew cab of the general foreman's truck. Literally, and I'm embarrassed how many stupid questions I asked that day, which I'll relay some of them to you. Although there was some great strength that, by the way, everything Heather said was exactly right. I could come up and say what she said and then just leave, and you have learned just about everything I'm going to add. I'm just going to add some flavor to the wisdom that Heather brought to her presentation. But I asked all sorts of really basic questions because I didn't know. But I was in the guise of everybody else who's not here. All the people we serve, I was them who don't know exactly like I didn't know. I'm like, okay, all this water's coming up off the street. What do you do first? And I won't continue repeating myself. But the general foreman I know is thinking in his head, oh my gosh, this is our CEO. What a blooming idiot we have. But I asked him, what do you do? He says, well, you turn the valve, you turn the water off. I'm like, oh, that makes sense. By the way, one thing I've learned in the water sector, as a non-engineering type, I'm a lawyer, is that everything I learned and continue to learn makes perfect sense once it's explained. That's why turning the lights on and having different thoughts is like, gosh, that makes a lot of sense. There's so much progress we can make when you see the sense, because there is so much reason in all of this. So I said, of course you have to know. How do you do that? To back at the treatment plant, no. We don't turn off the whole city. We turn a little valve. And I said, oh, that makes sense too. How many valves do we have in the city? Like 100? He goes, 42,000. That was one of the many moments of speechlessness I was like, 42,000. Well, how do you know where they are? This was my first experience with what I did not know then, was asset management. I'm like, well, how do you know where they are, aside from all the snow on the ground? And he reached down at my feet, picked up one of those books that Heather mentioned, plunked it up on the seat next to us, sit next to me. This is an old truck. It was one of those trucks with just one big front seat. You remember those? That's how old the fleet was at the time. He plunks it on it and starts turning pages. You younger folks, this is how we used to get around cities, was with an atlas. And got to the page that showed the streets of the water main. And it had lots of handwritten notes, yellow stickies, blood stains, coffee stains, rips. It was, God knows how old that thing was. But it showed what they knew about the assets of the city at some point in the past. That came back, by the way. And then he rolled, this was rolled down the window, and team members would come up to the window, and he'd look at the map and orient and said, okay, over there, it's about 10 feet, dig down, you'll get the valve cap. I was like, oh, you turn the valve to turn them off. He's like, yeah. And this was fascinating to me. And by the way, it was fascinating to all of our customers when we explained it to them. Although in this case, it scared me, because they would shovel down, get to the thing, turn off, and put this T-bar into the ground, and then employees would stand across from each other to turn it. But you all know this. This was all news to me, to turn the valve to turn the water off. Lo and behold, they kept breaking or not working. So then they would go back to the map and say, well, you have to go out to the next valve to turn that one off. And this went on for a good hour and a half, and we weren't getting the water off. And I said, why do all the valves keep breaking? He said, well, it's probably the first time we've touched that valve in 20 years. Who knows? Since the last water main. We should be using them, actually, I did learn the word, exercising them every once in a while, but we don't have any program to do that. So think about it, as I was, where you're trying to turn a valve to shut off water at the moment it is pouring through the pipe into a break. Like trying to build a dam into a moving river. It's not easy to do. And that's a lot of stress. Some of them just broke, others were corroded. And even after hours of that, we couldn't get the water off. And it's like, what do we do now? Well, we called Kurt back at where we had started that day, back at the Bryan Street pump station, because that was the head of our external underground assets. Kurt had the messiest office in D.C. Water because he could. He remembers everything. I'm the opposite. I remember nothing, so my office is neat. I'm not neat because I'm a neat person. I'm neat because if I don't know where I put something, I will forget I even have it. He didn't have any organized piles of stuff everywhere. It's like, but as soon as we asked him, he goes, well, of course you can't get the water off. There's a tremendous amount of development that's been done in that part of the city. None of those records are on that little book that's at the foot of that truck. And if you go here and there, and he started listing off of his memory where there had been projects and where the valves were. So we got finally the valves off. And the water goes off. And I was like, well, what do we do now? He says, well, now we have to wait for Miss Utility to come out and mark all the other utilities here, because we can't dig down in that until we know where the gas lines are and the power lines are and all the other stuff that's under there. And my first reaction was, oh my God, are they going to use a map like ours? Because God knows with gas lines and power lines of what's going to happen. And in that case, we didn't hit anything. In my tenure, we had a huge water main break at 14th Street and F, or maybe it was E, but right next to the Treasury building. And we almost hit a gas line that nobody had any idea was there, literally like this far away with one of our, this after Miss Utility. It's absolutely disastrous if you don't know where those assets are. But then we finally did get that and got it down, and that's when we could finally see what it was that broke. Because we think we knew what it was on those sheets. A lot of that data is way out of date. Who knows whether they've updated it, what exactly, because you can't fix it until you know the pieces that are necessary for the fix. And I remember sitting in the front seat of the crew cab going, oh my God, this is how we run drinking. Well, this was 2009, Washington, D.C., how we run a water system. And that was my first step in the evolution of what ultimately turned into an asset management program. So I started investigating out of curiosity what was true and how we did these sorts of things at DC Water. DC Water has 1,200 employees, a $600 million operating budget. It's one of the bigger utilities in the country, drinking water, wastewater, stormwater, the whole thing. And I was sort of stunned by what I learned. And one of the many things that Heather said that's right is that the people who do this work are wonderful people. And they're often doing things that when someone fresh to the equation asks the question seems crazy. But to them, they're used to it. All of us have that in our lives, things that we're used to feeling or doing that someone else would think crazy. It's just that's what we've gotten used to. And it's actually more than that. When I would talk to our team, they're like, it's not just that we're used to this, because we know it's not the best way to do it. It's that we're amazed we're able to do what we're doing given the crappy information we have and the terrible tools that we've been given. We'd love to have better information. Do you think we want to be sitting out in the street looking like a bunch of dodos because we have out-of-date information on a book that's 25 years old with bloodstains on it? That's my blood. But no one ever asks us that question from Heather. No one ever asks us. No one's ever asked how we could improve it. So we do the best we can in all weather at all time with what we've got. And we think we're actually pretty good at this under those circumstances. It's a very important principle for all of us in this field on any kind of updating and modernization is because it does seem, when I was sitting there, God, this is, I hate to use this word, but it seems stupid to me. Is that what? But it isn't by stupid people, and if they have the slightest sense that that's what you think of them, the first and most impenetrable wall to change goes up. Here we've been doing this hard work. We're out here in the snow in the winter at any time of day or night doing something with, and you think we're dumb? You may not think that, but if they have that impression, then they're just going to shut you out. We have been so hard at work. We are so dedicated to this. Nobody gives us credit for what we do. And I see it all the time by people who don't mean that. Coming in, I've got all these cool things and smart. They're like, have you ever asked us how we do it or why or what we would need? That was my most important lesson for all the changes that came thereafter at DC Water. But here's the kind of things I found, which is very similar to what you just heard from Heather. So what is the median age at the time of a water main in Washington, D.C.? Median. So you math folks will know that's half are older and half are newer, I think. I'm really bad at math. But median, 78 years. So that 75-year system that was put in, that's not even as old as our median in Washington, D.C., probably similar to Chicago. And I had a water main break on MacArthur Boulevard. I was in Boston at the time giving a presentation not unlike this. I jumped right back to Logan, flew back because it was a big one, and there was a school flooded and all this, and I always take on that kind of the job, as to talk to the press and everyone else. And we dug down, and on the side of that pipe was M-E-I-G-S, Miggs. Anybody here knew the name Miggs? Very famous engineer. Montgomery Miggs had done that work when he was a colonel before he became a general as the quartermaster general for Abraham Lincoln in the Civil War. That transmission line had been put in 1856. It was hell to find the replacement parts, by the way. We put it on the Warren Network, and we got one from Boston, right where I was speaking earlier in the day, because Boston has a system old like ours. But that's how old the system is. I said, well, how much do we replace? This is on the drinking water side. In any place, the replacement of sewer is going to be longer and less and older and more expensive than drinking water. I say this like I know this for sure, but everywhere I've been, the drinking water are closer to the surface, so you don't have to go down as far to fix them. Sewers are bigger and deeper. So if you didn't have annex and all your technologies that go inside and line it, and every once in a while this has to be done, digging up a street from curb to curb, getting down that deep, moving everything out of the way that's above the sewer is god awful. So sewers are rarely replaced, at least the big ones. They're lined and fixed in small increments because it's so expensive. But on the drinking water side, we were replacing, in 2009, on the backs of a 78 median year age system, 1/3 of 1% a year. Not very well targeted either, for God's sake. That's a 300-year replacement cycle, I think, on top of a 78-year. So each year, actually, the median age was getting older. The system was aging at that level. I was like, that's impossible. We're doomed to failure. And how do we, and I was curious, like, how do we decide? And how do we know who's connected? Is it these old things? And they took me to a trailer at Blue Plains. Some of you may have been to Blue Plains. It's a beautiful facility, the largest advanced treatment plant on the planet because it has tertiary treatment. I was just at a tour there last Wednesday. Took my heart. I loved being there. I worked there all those years, smelling the sweet smell of sewage every morning when I drove in. But the question that we had of how to work these systems at Blue Plains, how do we know who's connected? I said, well, it's in that trailer. So it was a beat-up old A-frame trailer. I went up, and they had gotten from somewhere a big old card catalog from a library. And all the tap cards were on little handwritten 3x5 cards. Sorry about the data that Heather, all written in different eras. Some of the handwriting looked like it was done in old quill pens, for God's sake, or something. And it was in a card catalog. And it was by an older gentleman. God bless him. He was like Kurt. He remembered where everything was. Oh, yeah, it's over here. Yeah. Nobody else had any idea what the heck was going on with it. And I was like, this is how we know who's connected to us? And one thing after the other like that, I was just, oh my Lord. So I started pushing in a certain way, though. So that crew that worked that day at that water main, and this was, again, going back to this principle of listening, so this seems to be a big challenge in these water mains. How would you do it differently? And that was the key to everything that happened in the next 8 years of my tenure at DC Water, always starting there, asking the team. That doesn't mean they had all the answers, but they did have needs and ideas. There was not a single member of that team that wanted to use the old book that was out of date to do all that stuff. They knew how to use it. They knew how it worked. They had a sense of how to call in Kurt. They had their own workarounds for everything. So they were comfortable with it, even though it seemed crazy, but they didn't like it. He said, well, we'd love to see updated information, all this development's going on. How do we get that information? Wouldn't it be great to have it on an iPad? I'm like, that'd be a great idea. Why don't we do that? And we started with the team building the idea of putting some of our assets on an iPad so that we could see it. I didn't know that was asset management. I had no idea. So I was pushing on all sorts of things like this at DC Water. In parallel, I didn't realize a meeting shows up on my calendar for asset management. So I went to the meeting. I was on my calendar, and I was in my little conference room, and there was all sorts of people there. It seemed odd to me. I'm like, where's the CFO? This is an asset management meeting. And one of the humor I get from asset management, we all know what that means. To the uninitiated, I thought it was a finance meeting. I thought we have debt instruments, and we have this, that. We have a lot of money that we put aside in case of emergencies. We had 180 days of running cash if we needed it. I thought it was that meeting. Or do we have it invested properly? Is it safe? No, they said, the asset management is how we manage our assets. And I said, okay, where's the CFO? He said, no, the physical assets. I'm like, got it, understand. I've always wondered, do we need to, and that's why buried asset management really helps, because that one word lets anyone who's not one of us realize, oh, we're not talking about money. We're talking about something else. And so in these parallel courses of how we were doing practical things ground up with our employees to improve how the work was done. And then asset management. And I want to tell you that we failed spectacularly twice at asset management at DC Water. I probably shouldn't say that. The first time was a personnel challenge. And all the things that Heather said is true at any size. Well, some utilities are so small that it's actually one person arguing with themselves because they have multiple jobs. But in almost every utility, there's all sorts of fault lines that make asset management difficult. You already heard it this morning, inside the fence and outside the fence. Outside the fence is actually what all the people see. They might be glad that Blue Plains is a really well-run facility, but what they care about is the water main and the sewer line that serves their business or their home. And that's outside the fence. And there's a whole group of people, separate unions, who do the outside the fence work, and they don't particularly like the inside the fence people, not on a personal level, but the outside, just giving the inside baseball a lot of utilities, the outside of the fence people think the inside of the fence people get all the money. Because the inside of the fence treatment plants are regulated by permits. So when you're doing your capital priority, you always fund those things, because if you don't, you can get thrown in jail along with the $125,000 a day penalties. So Blue Plains was getting upgrades and knew this and knew that, and out in the field, they got 1/3 of 1% replacement on a system that was falling apart with an old book sitting on the floor of a truck that had a roll-down window. It also is unions. We had a different union supporting our drinking water personnel than our wastewater personnel. And we started with wastewater. And we started getting efficient. When you're that low, there's only one way to go. Well, you can get worse. But we started to get better pretty quickly. By the way, the first thing we digitized in asset management was storm drains. And then that allowed us to start thinking about how we deployed our trucks to do storm drains. Everything that Heather said is right. As soon as you start collecting data and looking at it, everybody starts realizing things that they might have thought or wondered, but it becomes clear. And at least in my experience, nobody doesn't want to do what the sweet reason shows once they see it. Unless there's a very specific reason like, well, if we do it that way, my union will lose personnel. So there could be reasons not to do it, but it's never based on just the idea. And I didn't find that all that often, except when we started doing better with wastewater and we wanted to move some people back and forth, and the idea that any one union would lose personnel to another union. The other, Heather mentioned the difference between engineering and operations. Huge separation in almost every utility, certainly of size. And our asset management and capital program was dictated by the engineering office. Just as Heather described, data would come in from outside the fence. The engineers would take it, wonderful engineers, by the way, some of my favorite people. They would be the ones to figure out what it meant. And the folks on the outside would sort of wonder what was going to happen, and again, would always feel short shrift. So we failed the first time because I picked the wrong people to do the work, and it was too much of we're smarter than you, and had no relationship with personnel. And that was internal. So I was like, okay, well, I'll hire a consultant to do it. So we hired a consultant from a very well-known and fine engineering firm, paid him a lot of money, and that was a spectacular failure. Heather and I were joking about this. If you pay anyone a lot of money, their feeling is they have to deliver something pretty big and complex, because that's what you bought. And we ended up, one of the huge lessons is never start asset management with the whole thing all at once. That was when our personnel felt, what are you telling us to do? Do you think we're stupid? You never asked us? We got this huge package plunked on top of us that pretty much was resisted by everybody in the organization, independent of what it had in it. I'm not questioning that it actually didn't have good things in there, but there had been no effort to try to integrate it with the people of the place who had to feel it and believe they were part of it. So the third time we did asset management, we did a ground-up effort built on what we had already been doing with digitizing storm drains, and we digitized water mains. And then we put laptops in every general foreman's truck. And the way we had the laptops work had been co-created by them. So yes, we had to have software vendors come in who knew how all that stuff works, but they didn't just come in. By the way, a common challenge for a lot of these really smart, wonderful people with solutions is they come in and here's my thing, and the people who are looking at it don't know how to use it. It doesn't feel like it's something that is connected to how they do things. So they go back to they go back to what they know. Because when you're under fire to do a water main, you're not going to want to be puzzling through no, just give me the dang paper and we'll figure it out like we always did. So we were very carefully at every step working with our personnel so that when you see this on the screen, how should it look? What is it that you want to see when you touch on something? How should that look? What is the kind of information you'd like to see first? And it was enormously successful. All that we all hear about the resistance of people to do this kind of thing, I found not to be true the third time we tried it, because it was their stuff being done with them to help their priorities, not being done at them or to them. And I have to say, and I know so many technology vendors, I'm an advisor to a bunch of them, and they're wonderful. They're smart. They do have great things. I'm amazed at the technologies. Go at WEFTech, in 24 hours, they're going to have 2 freaking football fields of this stuff. But so often when those things are presented, they're presented like, we're the smart folks, we know how to do things, you should do it this way. And even if it's right, the person who's listening is going to automatically resist on a human level someone coming in and telling them how to do their job better than they can without ever having talked to them. That person, in my experience, I wonder if this is true in Chicago, will almost always ask for these things, maybe with different language. They may not use the same. These are the kinds of things. Wouldn't it be great if we, and as soon as we started asking those questions, well, it would be nice to do that. Why don't you help us figure out? And when we have a procurement, it's not just going to be the engineering and procurement office figuring this out. Why don't you sit on this whole effort to help make that decision so that when it comes, you feel part of it, because you are. And that's when change in asset management started happening at DC Water faster than we could keep up with, which is not the typical story in a utility. Because we kept on asking, whenever we hired new people at DC Water, which was every month, we usually had a crew of people coming in, I'd meet them all early on. What I would say, because I believed it, is you're coming to DC Water, bless you. This is the Lord's work that we do here in providing this essential service. How many lives do we support? All of them. Every living organism depends on us. How many jobs do we support? All of them. Every job place, without exception, requires us. There's no one else who can say that except power, and they can only say it because they power us. So I said, you're doing this, God, bless you for being here. And I do care what you do, but for this comment, I don't care what you do. Whatever you do, soon you will know that better than anybody else here. You do permits, well, at some point you're going to get, why is the permit done this way? I find most people in their jobs get to that point, don't know what to do with those ideas, so they just sort of oh hell, I'll just keep doing the dumb way that we've always been doing it. And that's disgruntled, as opposed to, come tell us. Is there something that you learned? Come tell us what it is, and be careful, because we might just change with your idea in mind. And those are the people who are your most enthusiastic employees, I think, without exception. Anyone who feels they can mix their own ideas and creativity into a job are the people you build loyalty from for life. That's certainly been, for the most part, my experience, and was certainly true with asset management. But what are some of the things that then started growing and learning about asset management? The first was listening, and morale of the team just started going up. They were excited. My last day at DC Water, I was very sad. I was going around the facilities saying farewell. And the gentleman who runs our fleet, those 600 vehicles, Mr. Hawkins, and he grabbed me by the arm and took me outside to the trucks, the old ones that used to have it was a brand new truck. It had CCTV with a TV built into it, specially designed by them, that microwave the information back to Bryan Street, that place we had left from, so an engineer at Bryan Street could be seeing at real time the same thing that they were seeing with that little gadget that's going into the pipe. And they figured, I didn't even know it was happening. That was the first time I'd ever heard of the project. And he was so proud of it, one of our longest and oldest employees, that they had done that. So the morale and the enthusiasm of the team just went straight up. And it opened a door to change lots of things we didn't even know needed changing. As soon as you ask, you have today, all those tap cards are electronic. You can submit all your permits and everything else electronically. I mean, everything has changed over the years, but it started with asking those questions. Second, we made friends with agencies all over the city. The fire department needed the same asset management maps that we did. In fact, they accused the water department, turned out not to be true, there was litigation and we proved it, but they accused us of being responsible for several fires because they didn't know well enough how much water pressure was coming through which fire hydrant. It's your fault. We didn't know what to do. Well, we showed that it wasn't their fault either. By the time, if we'd had the perfect system with the perfect info, the fire was just too far gone by the time everyone arrived. But it certainly gave them a convenient scapegoat, because a huge art collection burned down in D.C., and there was a lot of anger, understandably so, if it had been true that our old stuff had been the reason that the fire had happened. So we gave the fire department laptops for their trucks with the same information that we had, and all of a sudden the fire department were our best friends. We made an ally and a friend and a colleague, and they updated their information when they heard it. And so you had not only us now doing asset management, we had the fire department doing asset management. And guess what that led to? I didn't know this at all until it happened. Well, the city has to get insurance for all sorts of things, and you get rated on a scale of how well you respond that sets insurance rates for everything. Well, anything to do with dwellings and buildings and all the rest. We were at one of the lower level insurance levels, and once we started doing all this, we ended up at the top one, number one in insurance, whatever that rating is, and everybody's insurance bill started going down. And they were like, we love you, DC Water. You just saved us. Oh, like I never even knew that was possible. But we made more friends. Then we realized that one of the biggest complaints in every city of any size is when someone comes out and fixes the water main and then comes in a month later and fixes the gas line. As soon as we digitized and had an asset management program, we could start interacting with other agencies for when they were doing things, because we had an understanding and an idea of what we were going to do when, and we could show them. By the way, when I went to that first asset management prioritization program, it was the engineering office in a big conference room in a U-shaped table with printed maps with data on it, trying to make decisions. That's how, it was like your picture of a PDF of a map. That was how they were figuring out. And they did have, here's where water main breaks have occurred, and little dots on the map, color-coded with magic markers and all the rest. It was better than doing nothing at all. But we were putting our data now in a centralized database that had the updated data, and it wasn't only that it allowed all of us to be more efficient and more accurate when we were going to dig, it also meant, gosh, gas is doing a project over there. We weren't planning to do the water main. This is another layer to prioritizing a capital program. We weren't going to do that project, but if you're going to dig up the street anyways, we're going to speed our project up because we'll take advantage, cut our costs, and do the project we were going to do 3 years. We wouldn't have known that if we didn't have a way to cascade data, asset management across agencies. Again, and by the way, the mayor loved telling these stories. And as always, the mayor gets all the credit, as it always should be, of look what we're doing now versus before. We're doing all this, it's saving money and all the rest, and it was asset management that got us there. It allowed us, and this is something all of the speakers, and we'll continue to highlight, it's amazing the things you start to see when you have it, when data is presented. Because I kept on asking, there would be groups of water mains. This is different than the most important level of, gosh, this old one keeps breaking. You may have a reason to do different things in different places, but instead of just spreading it around, let's do this line, and here's why. And that we certainly started to see, as Heather was beautifully pointing out. But we also started seeing water main breaks in timing. Why did 5 water main breaks happen in this particular area of the city during this 24-hour period with pipes of different age? That doesn't fit into, it's just the older. Well, it turned out it was pressure changes. We didn't see that until we started matching up the asset management visual with time. See, in Washington, D.C., the drinking water treatment facility, even though it's paid for by D.C. Water, this always aggravated me. Our ratepayers paid all the treatment costs. But because Washington, D.C. had been a federal city, it's the only drinking water treatment plant in the country that is run by the Army Corps of Engineers. Because back in the federal city days, the Army Corps, they ran everything. It was a federal city. And that part had never devolved to D.C. Water, even though we paid for it. What that meant is they were opening and shutting the valves within their purview without us knowing it. I didn't know this either. I was the lawyer, but as soon as someone told me, it makes sense. When you shut a valve, it sends a pressure shock wave through the system. If folks don't know it's coming, all sorts of bad things happen. And that's what we learned was triggering groups of water main breaks. What? But we didn't see that until we saw why are those not just, it's not, there is no explanation for this group over here. It's not anything we can see other than time. And when we started correlating it with other things happening, it was almost always a pressure pulse. Not always, but often a pressure pulse. So we started seeing other things. Some of the other advantages. It turns out asset management build friendships between inside the fence and outside the fence. Because one of the largest components of underground assets at DC Water was at Blue Plains. Because it's, I can't remember the number, miles of underground galleries and infrastructure. So the primary tanks, the big circle things, that stuff is going down. It's all of that, by the way, is great pollutant control because it's almost all for free. Gravity is what makes primary tanks work. Certain stuff floats to the top, you skim it off. Other stuff floats to the bottom, it goes out. Those are 20 feet underground, and then there's an enormously complex underground system that's connecting all and taking the biosolids over here and taking the tailings over there, and it's all underground. And inside the fence, they felt that part of the system was not as paid attention to as the part you saw on the surface. They had the same issue. So they actually have made common cause with doing asset management for things underground. including a specialized radio system that could work underground, independent of the cell program. And all of a sudden, friendships for these inside the fence, outside the fence folks that used to sort of battle with each other, they made common cause and became friends, and were really happy, by the way, how that system worked and how it was designed was also by our team. Perhaps the most important outcome, and this is what we've seen in all the places we work, I'm sure Heather and all the rest who are doing this work, is there's no community that wants to be known for doing things in a way that seems crazy, or even if that people don't know that. They don't know that the way the assets are being run, but they do want to be known in this day and age as a community that does smart things. A lot of small communities want people to come back. They've worried about their young people leaving and not coming back. They want to know, we have lots of things you should come back for. We are creative and innovative, and in every case I've seen it, the mayor's usually skeptical at first. It costs money up front to do this work. But when you start achieving the benefits and have these stories about, well, you stay there like, we are a smart city. You should come back to be part of what we're doing here in whatever the city is. Mayors love to tell the story. How was that? The mayors, I served under 3 mayors in D.C. All 3 of them would come to our events. Joe Biden, when he was vice president, came to one of our events because they like telling stories about government doing things that make sense and save money. By the way, on the saving money point, the other thing I learned that I did not know is that replacing a pipe is the cheapest part of a pipe replacement project, at least in a city of size. I just haven't done them directly in many other places, although we've advised on it. So in that 21st in New Hampshire, I followed that project through its whole history because I was so curious. That was my case study. And I was, well, what does happen? So you do a patch after you get it in. Turns out in D.C. there was a 3-step process to get the final road completion for that patch. I don't know if this is true in Chicago. It wasn't just once. You did a kind of a patch, then you did a second level, and then eventually, I always said D.C. was paving the city on the back of the water ratepayers, curb to curb, and usually from way out a distance, but so that you'd see this brand beautiful new street. And that was far more expensive, time-consuming. The permits that were required, the traffic plans, Washington, D.C., always in the top 3 of worst cities for traffic. You cut traffic off for a water project, there's hell to pay. And you have to pay a lot of money to get permits and guards and DDOT people to help guide everything. That all was a very large percentage of the cost of replacing water infrastructure. And the water infrastructure itself wasn't that expensive. And the other reality that we learned over time, and all of these were stories that then started, well, gosh, if we know what we can do, sometimes we're going to understand that there's a problem before it happens. Many of these cases we can clean in line without digging up the street. And it's exactly right. You have a big system. In the old days, you do the whole thing. Well, no, we're going to do a spot thing here. We're going to do an excavation there, because actually much of this pipe is perfectly fine. There's only portions of it. Once you use, I don't understand the little ball that goes through the pipe and does things and tells you about it, and you get the data back on a laptop, and it says, well, actually the pipe is fine except for here, here, and here. And if you did spot work, cleaning, lining, whatever you got to do in those places, you don't really need to replace that whole damn pipe for another 20 years. We're like, yes, because that money could go for something else. And we had story after story after story, and then asset management became digital knowledge. Now, all of this is, you start with all of that, then our folks wanted to, well, shouldn't we know what the flow are in our sewers? So you put in a sensor, and if there's going to, one of the worst things is sanitary sewer backup. That's like the worst for a utility, because it's not only extremely expensive, you get lawsuits, people could get really sick. Well, it turns out if you have a flow sensor in a manhole, maybe you all know this, when I learned this I thought it was so cool, and it sits there showing the flow. That's not really complicated, just how much flow is in the sewer. You'll get the cadence of, you'll see people coming home from work, you see the daily life of a city through those flow charts, which I found pretty fascinating. But what you'll also see over time is here's the manhole. If the blockage is downstream from the manhole, the flow in it will start to increase as it starts backing up behind the blockage, but before the blockage is severe enough to cause it to actually do an overflow. And an AI system can say, beep, 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 check that out. So now you send a truck on your own time, at your own pace, to solve a problem that doesn't need a whole rerouting of the sewage while you get in there. It's fixed. People don't even know it was ever wrong. And it's the opposite if it's on the other side. If there's the blockage on this side of the, then the flow will start decreasing when it shouldn't be, because it's backing up behind the blockage. So you start building on the asset management program with one step after the other. It turns out we had been cleaning, this was, well, I'm just repeating everything that Heather said. We were cleaning our storm drains on just a regular cycle, 25,000 storm drains, a lot of people. Turns out some needed more cleaning because of the topography and all these, and others hardly needed it at all. As soon as we had that data, we had less people doing more effective storm drain cleaning. No one got fired. We moved those people to other work. And it was another story the mayor told. Like, look, that's using data, and well, it was incredible. All of this, by the way, leads to why I left DC Water, which may sound ironic. But I've told versions of this story. Some of you probably heard my drinking water, like snowpocalypse drinking water story before. I have an equally fun story about one of the worst sewer problems we ever had in DC. With the bat phone being always the common denominator. But I would tell these stories, trying to encourage folks, talk to your people. You're going to hear them say things. They won't maybe use the language of the software otherwise, but it's not they're opposed to doing things better. They just don't want things done to them that they don't know how to use. So start that way, and you'll be amazed, I was, at what you'll hear, and then if they're involved, at how quickly actually change can happen. And I would tell that story, and a lot of the municipal water leaders who'd come up to me after those presentations, there's an interesting story, you tell it pretty well, and it bears no relationship to us. You had 1,200 employees. You had 2,000 contractors of one sort. At one point, we had 5,000 contractors when we were at the peak of our CSO plan. I've got 72 employees. I ought to have 100. So I am way understaffed. I don't have anyone who has the chance to figure all these things out. My balance sheet, we are in deficit. I don't have the money to spend for the projects we know, let alone the ones we don't know. So we're doing reverse asset management. We're just holding on. You do have to just do the emergencies if that's all the money you have, because the emergencies just keep happening. You can't get ahead of it without time and thought and preparation and planning. And if you just you're running a fire department. God bless these people. Problem hits, we roll our trucks, we are proud of what we do in any sorts of weather or time, but that's all we can do as we get smaller and have less money. And by the way, have systems that are oversized. A lot of the places that we go have lost population, have lost industry. And the question that these people would say, so what are we supposed to do? We're not a DC Water, we're not Chicago, we're not that we don't have enormous challenges, and big systems are way harder to do asset management for than little systems, just because the sheer complexity of it all. And that was what got to me. It's like, there's got to be an answer for that. I didn't know about the EFC in New Mexico because Heather has an answer for that. And I decided I'm going to step down from DC Water and form Moonshot Missions. The name Moonshot came from a paper I wrote. If any of you are interested, it was a paper identifying what I see as the obstacles for technology innovation adoption. They're common. They're across every utility. I wrote it out in an article. Dave Henderson from XBB Water, if any of you know him, he asked me, write the Moonshot. So I did, and that became the name of the company. But that identified all of, when a company comes and says, if you do this, you will save money, they show you that part. So here's what's happening in the world without it is your system is getting older, so performance is getting worse. And because it's getting older, it's more expensive to run, so your costs are going up. And what business, public or private, can survive if you're getting worse and charging more? That's a doomsday scenario for any enterprise. And what the technology firm will say is, if you do our thing, your performance will start going up, and your system will start getting better. I mean, your performance will go up, and your costs will go down. Who doesn't want that? But what they don't show is that's once it's implemented, built, and understood, trained, and operated. But all of the steps coming all the way back from, should we try something new? What should we try? And you go to WEFTEC, but I don't know how anybody goes to WEFTEC and says, you go into a big utility, this room 2 foot, what the heck am I supposed, what am I supposed to do with all that? Well, you're going to do procurement. No, who's going to do that? Who's going to even write the procurement? All these steps and who the people I got to review and select between technologies I don't really understand. And then once we select it, we have to buy it. Where's that money going to come from? I'm already in a deficit. Yes, it'll save money, but now I got this new stuff. How are my people going to know how to use it? So all of those are the obstacles, and the moonshot was to overcome them. And my sense of how to do this, which is very similar to what Heather's been doing since 1992, was to create Moonshot Missions, which is a nonprofit. You can look us up online, moonshotmissions.org. We are all utility people. So I figure the way to overcome the obstacles to change is to have an organization that has no stake in the sale. Like I said, I always say to tech folks, if we do our job, more people will be buying things. So it'll be good for us. But we won't. It's like what Heather said, we saved $3.5 million, where's my cut? We don't get any cut. All we're here for is to try to present good ideas that we have personal experience with, and that we will sit at your shoulder to walk you through it so you don't fear it. You understand what it is. We'll actually take you someplace to show you it if you want to see. And that's what Moonshot's idea is. Take advantage of utility personnel talking to their brethren, so a peer-to-peer, trusted advisor with no stake other than good outcomes to help overcome all of those obstacles. And I've been joined by an incredible crew of people, including a number who volunteer. You'll see them, Andy Cricken, who ran in Camden County, Mike Sturr, who ran Portland Water Bureau, a whole crew of really senior utility people. I've got Class 4 drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater operators. Class 4 is usually the highest classification for an operator. These folks, not me, can go to a site and in an afternoon have a good idea of what are those transformative projects. But we don't present it. Humble is what we like to call ourselves. We have this collaborative conversation. We come up with joint ideas. We walk with the utility. Which are the ones you'd like to do first? And we do a heat map, like importance, but also implementation ease. I don't mean ease in a bad way. Don't start with the $1 million consultant-led asset management program. It will fail. Start with something that you can get hold of, can understand. And what I experienced was at DC Water and in all the places we've helped, when someone gets that first taste of trying something that does something really cool, and they know about it, and they've been part of it, and they're proud of themselves. I want to do another one of those. What's next? So then we're not trying to stay. We just want to get someone on the path, understand how they could do it, and then once they're on the path, in our experience, the path keeps going. So that's what Moonshot Missions is. And asset management is one of the fundamental attributes for what we help with. Just as Heather has described, often as a partner with Heather, by the way. What has unfolded just in the last period of time, and this is a relatively new, am I near the end of my time? I guess I am, so it was hard going at first because we were trying to help utilities that have no money. Think about making a business model out of that. Like they had no money to pay us, that's why we're trying to help them. That's why they need the help. By the way, they can go from no phone to cell phone, without putting up all the wires in between. There are some advantages to being behind because as long as it's well done with the staff, you can leap forward. But we didn't struggle. We were getting philanthropic dollars, but sort of slowly. And then the bipartisan infrastructure law came along that has significant funding through the SRF program in each state. By the way, many of the SRF programs require asset management programs to get an SRF loan. Most of them. I can't remember, Heather, if you have the list, or I've seen the list of a whole slew of states that require some level of asset management. Because the state wants to know that if you're applying for a project, you've been thoughtful about what you're applying for. And that it makes sense to us to invest scarce public money in that project versus any of the other ones because you've done an analysis and all the rest. And the bipartisan infrastructure law, and the Biden administration wants 40% of those funds, just as 40 to go to small, not just small, but disadvantaged communities who have the least capability of doing an SRF app. Anyone done an SRF application? That is hard work. God bless you, I'm going to hire you. SRF applications are not for the faint of heart. So we have been selected, along with Heather at the Southwest DFC, is to be a national environmental finance center funded by EPA to do this work for low-income, disadvantaged, small communities, not only small, anywhere in the United States. We would work through a regional, I won't go into the big EFC description because it would take me another half hour, but there's an EFC, Environmental Finance Center, doing this work in every region of the country, mirroring the EPA regions. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Heather's is region 6. We're a national EFC, and we support the regional EFC, and we're the tech crew. We have a narrow lane. Our folks can go out and figure out the transformative projects. We don't want just shovel-ready. We want shovel-worthy that can help change things on the balance sheet, use some of the innovations you know so well. So if you're interested in Moonshot, we'd love to talk to you. If you have communities you think we can be of service to or that Heather could be of service to, we're always looking to help and serve. But it's all fundamentally premised on asset management. So to finish, I just want to say thank you for having me here. Thank you for doing this. Size to me makes no difference. I've been in way smaller groups and way bigger groups. To me, in any place I have a Zen view, the people who're supposed to be there or here are here. That's you. And for all the things that a utility does, it's the drinking water distribution system and the wastewater collection system, what all the people in the businesses see and allow them to live and work. And so by doing what we do, it's not only that we're enabling economic growth. We are enabling public health. And all I can say to you for that is, God bless you for that. That is work at the side of angels. And I'm really glad to be, I hope, be there with you. I'm George at moonshotmissions.org, hard to find, easy to find. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a delight.
All right. That's great. Thank you so much, George. You really, I think, set us on the course that we want to be on, and that is trying to figure out.
Of the group.
Yeah, there you go.
Say hi, everyone. Hey.
Yeah. So
Well,
George.
I say, these are the folks who are like doing the things to protect your homes and businesses.
Yeah. So George touched on so many things that make asset management work and the value of asset management, and it was.
I'm sorry. The other thing I was not expecting, but one of the biggest advantages, every utility is talking about loss of personnel with retirements. When we started doing these projects, it started drawing in young talent who working with an iPad is like walking down the street. I mean, it's their natural way of living. And we started getting young talent into the utility because they had the chance to use all this technology stuff that's old hat to them in this area that they wanted, that they could see a result. So the personnel and human workforce side of this was another great advantage. Sorry, Tom, I keep talking.
Yeah, that's a big challenge that we've got to deal with is the workforce development and professional development as we move forward. Thanks so much, George. I really appreciate it. Absolutely. Good to have you here. Any way that we can work with you, we'll be glad to.